Picture a village, maybe 200 people. Everyone knows everyone. Nobody here was born with the right to give you orders. If someone tries, you can just walk away, argue back, or laugh in their face. Then, one generation, that stops being true. Someone points to a man and says, "Obey him." Not because he's stronger than you, not because he grew the food you eat, but because of who his father was. And somehow, thousands of people agree. That is one of the strangest things our species has ever done. And today we're going to find out how it happened. Humans didn't evolve with crowns. There's no gene for divine right. For almost all of human history, there were no kings, no queens, no palaces, just small groups of people making decisions together, face to face. So somewhere along the way, something changed. And to understand what changed, we need one simple distinction. A leader can lead people. A ruler has people who are expected to obey, and whether they agree or not. That gap between leading and ruling is the whole mystery of this video. Here's the twist. There was probably no single day when someone invented kingship. No prehistoric genius sat down and designed a crown. Archaeologists and anthropologists still argue about exactly how political authority took shape. And honestly, that disagreement is part of what makes this so interesting. But we can trace some of the pressure points. When people stop moving and start farming, new questions appear that a small mobile band never had to answer. Who decides how the stored grain gets shared out in a bad year? Who organizes the irrigation channels that dozens of families depend on? Who settles a land dispute when there's no more empty land to walk away to? More people settling in one place creates more problems that need coordinating. More coordinating tends to create people whose whole job is coordination. And people whose whole job is coordination sometimes discover they don't want to give that job back. But be careful here. This isn't a straight staircase from farming to kings. Plenty of large, complex societies in history never centralized power around a single ruler at all. Agriculture didn't automatically produce monarchy. It just created new problems, and different societies solved them in very different ways. One of the places where we can actually see this process in the dirt is the city of Uruk in southern Mesopotamia, more than 5,000 years ago. Uruk wasn't a village. At its height, it may have held tens of thousands of people, a scale earlier human communities had never sustained. And to keep a city like that running, someone had to track everything. Grain going into storehouses, labor going into building projects, goods moving through trade. Archaeologists have found the proof. Small clay tokens, then clay tablets pressed with wedge-shaped marks, and stone seals rolled across wet clay to mark ownership or approval. This is some of the earliest writing on Earth, and it wasn't poetry. It wasn't law. It was bookkeeping. Before humans wrote down stories about kings, we were already writing down who owed what to whom. That's worth sitting with for a second. Writing may not have started as a way to express ideas. It may have started as a technology for controlling resources. We shouldn't say Uruk invented kings. That overstates what the evidence shows. What Uruk gives us is something more precise. Some of the earliest solid evidence for institutional power. Temples that managed land and labor. Officials who weren't warriors or farmers, just administrators. A hierarchy that existed on clay tablets before it existed in any single person's biography. But institutions are one thing. People are another. And the story gets more personal a few hundred years later in the nearby city of Ur. In the 1920s, archaeologists excavating the so-called Royal Cemetery of Ur uncovered graves unlike anything else in the city. Gold headdresses, lapis lazuli, a stone that had to travel over 1,000 miles from what's now Afghanistan, silver, carnelian, elaborate jewelry, and, disturbingly, evidence of attendants who appear to have died alongside the tomb's main occupant. One of the most famous burials belonged to a woman named Puabi. Her name is confirmed by an inscribed seal found with her. What her exact title or political role actually was is genuinely debated among scholars. The evidence tells us she held extraordinary status and wealth, but historians are cautious about overclaiming exactly what office, if any, she held. Here's the part that should unsettle you. Most people in Ur lived, worked, and died, leaving almost no trace at all. And then there's this one person buried with enough imported luxury goods to represent years of some community's entire labor. What kind of society produces a gap that wide? That same question follows us to Egypt, but Egypt adds something new to the story. It makes obedience sacred. Egyptian kingship connected the ruler to the order of the cosmos itself. The pharaoh wasn't just an administrator or a war leader. Over time, Egyptian religious ideas tied the ruler's role to maintaining balance in the universe, a concept called ma'et. Obeying the ruler wasn't just following a government. It became, in a sense, part of keeping the world from falling apart. That said, it's a mistake to imagine one fixed idea of the god king lasting unchanged for 3,000 years. Egyptian kingship shifted enormously across different periods, sometimes emphasizing the pharaoh's divine nature more, sometimes less. Historians are careful not to flatten that long, changing history into a single sentence. But the core shift matters. Once a ruler's authority gets fused with religious and cosmic order, disobedience stops being just a political risk. It becomes something closer to a spiritual one. And now we hit the hardest question in this whole story. A king cannot personally force a city of 50,000 people to do anything. He doesn't have 50,000 hands. So what was actually doing the work of obedience? Power isn't only the ability to force people to comply. It's also the ability to make people believe that obeying is normal, even sacred, even beneficial, even inevitable. That belief got built from multiple directions at once. Religion supplied legitimacy. Redistributing food and resources during hard times supplied loyalty. Military force supplied fear. Public ceremony and monumental architecture supplied awe, and inherited titles supplied something sneakier. The idea that obedience wasn't really a choice being made. It was just the way things had always been, and there's something almost darkly funny buried in that last point. At some stage, a lot of very different societies landed on the same strange solution. Pick one person to hold enormous power, and then, when that person dies, just hand the job to their kid. Not because the kid earned it, just because of when they were born. Now, this story isn't only about men. Women reached political power through several different paths, and those paths varied enormously by culture and era. Some queens ruled through inheritance when a bloodline had no surviving male heir. Some held power as regents, governing on behalf of a young son. Some gained authority through religious office, marriage alliances, or independent wealth and lineage. Hatshepsut in Egypt rose from regent to ruling as pharaoh in her own right, commissioning major building projects and trade expeditions, one of the clearest examples of a woman holding the full authority of the office rather than just influence behind it. Earlier still, Sobekneferu appears in the historical record as a ruling queen at the end of Egypt's 12th dynasty, though far less is known about the details of her reign. There was no single template for a queen, just as there was no single template for a king. Power found different doors depending on the society. And this pattern, concentrated authority emerging from local pressures, doesn't just show up in Mesopotamia and Egypt. It shows up in different forms in early China, in ancient Iran, in parts of Mesoamerica, each shaped by its own geography, religion, and history. But it's important to resist a tempting shortcut, the idea that every complex society was destined to eventually produce a king. Some organized power collectively, some spread authority across councils or shifting leadership. Centralized kingship was common, but it was never the only answer humans came up with. So here's the real zoom out. The crown itself was never the invention. A piece of gold on someone's head doesn't make thousands of people obey. What actually had to be invented was everything underneath it: the belief systems, the bureaucracy, the religious justification, the inherited legitimacy, the shared story that made obedience feel less like submission and more like simply how the world works. And once you see that, it's hard not to notice that we still live inside systems built the same way. Not around kings anymore, necessarily, but around laws, institutions, and invisible ideas that get millions of strangers to cooperate without anyone holding a sword to their throat. So back to where we started. Why would anyone obey a king? Not because one man was strong enough to make them, because an entire civilization had spent generations building the belief that he should be obeyed. Out of grain stores and clay tablets, gold burials and sacred titles, inherited names and shared fear. Humans didn't just invent kings. We invented the machinery that made kings possible, and then we mostly forgot we built it at all.